Friends, gamers, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come not to praise Dungeons and Dragons, but to bury it. Or do I? Question mark, question mark, question mark. What's up, friends? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. It's about 12 noon on this, the fourth day of November 2024, as we spiral into the holidays. It's about that time of year where, as happens about every year around this time, where several members of the old school crawl out from under the rocks and ring their bells, rattle their cages, and proclaim to anybody who's listening that Dungeons and Dragons is dead. It's dead. Wizards of the Coast has killed their game. They've killed Dungeons and Dragons. Now, we'll remind you that for the other 350 days a year, these are the same people that consistently tell us they don't play Dungeons and Dragons, they don't support Wizards of the Coast, and they hate 5e, and they hate anybody who plays 5e. They will also consistently tell us how we're playing their game wrong. But every year, around this time of year, these same people who will tell us over and over and over again how they haven't opened a D&D book in 3,000 years, that Dungeons and Dragons is dead. But what is Dungeons and Dragons? In order to decide whether it's dead or not, we have to define what you think D&D is, what I think D&D is, what the old school think D&D is. I find it very hypocritical that these people every year cry and whine how Wizards of the Coast has killed Dungeons and Dragons, where the rest of the year they're telling us how much they hate Wizards of the Coast. They have no idea what Wizards of the Coast is doing. They don't support Wizards of the Coast. They don't play 5e. They have nothing to do with it, and how much they hate people who do play 5e. Pick a lane. Pick a lane. Okay? If you don't play it, you can't complain about the state it's in. Right? Am I wrong? I don't know. Am I? So what do we mean? I mean, by definition, Dungeons and Dragons stopped being Dungeons and Dragons when the guys who created it stopped working on it. When Gygax left home to go do other things and handed the reins of Dungeons and Dragons over to other people, for better or for worse, it technically stopped being D&D. It became whatever the next group of people made it, which would eventually become 3rd edition, and then 3.5, and then 4, and then 5, and then the current edition. So if you mean Dungeons and Dragons is dead, well, it died a long time ago. If you mean that Dungeons and Dragons is dead because it doesn't look like what it used to look like, well, yes, because it's changed. It's evolved for better or for worse. Dungeons and Dragons, the game, according to Hasbro, is not a thing anymore, and it hasn't been a thing for a long time. It's a lifestyle brand. It is a pop culture icon that has grown and transformed far beyond the limited confines of roll D20, stuff happens. So we have to define Dungeons and Dragons within the terms of the people who own the license. Because at the end of the day, it's not up to you and me to decide what is or isn't going on with Dungeons and Dragons. It's up to Hasbro. The fate of Dungeons and the Dragons brand is completely up to Hasbro and completely up to the Vox Populus. Like any other pop culture phenomenon, it has far outgrown its original things. Star Wars isn't just 3 movies about a guy named Luke Skywalker anymore. It's this huge thing that has grown far beyond any possible aspect. Star Wars, the cookbook. Dungeons and Dragons meat sticks exist. So it's not just a game. The Gygaxian Dungeons and Dragons ended when Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, started making it, and Gary went and done something else. If you want to play the ultimate evolution of Gygaxian's version of D&D, head on over to our friend Troll Lords Games and check out Castles and Crusades, because that's the closest step in the evolution of what Gygax wanted D&D to be when he left. Everything after that is whatever you, I, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast decides. Now, according to Hasbro, in their own words, Dungeons and Dragons is 3 things. There's Dungeons and Dragons, the pop culture brand. of which Hasbro has been focusing most of their energy on since, I don't know, 2020. There's Dungeons and Dragons, the digital aspect of which Hasbro has been very clear that that is the future for Dungeons and Dragons, digital, virtual, and they have been repeatedly clear about that fact since, I don't know, 2020. And there's what we now consider 6th edition Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game, of which Hasbro has said they do not feel makes them any more money at this point in time. Only Dungeons and Dragons, the brand, makes them money. They don't really care what happens to Dungeons and Dragons, the game. So, is Dungeons and Dragons, the pop culture brand, dead, as the OSR would have us think? No, it's alive and well. It has grown and mutated and evolved far beyond anything Gary Gygax could ever imagine, and it will outlive Hasbro. If Hasbro decides to drop D&D tomorrow, shelve it, and never do anything with it again, they have licensed it out to so many different aspects throughout the world that they can continue milking the pop culture brand much the same way Disney milks Star Wars without ever actually producing anything new for Star Wars. All you have to do is take that brand and put it on anything, and they're guaranteed it will probably sell. At least one person is going to buy every one of those beef sticks just to test them, even if they didn't turn around and say these were awful, but they're still going to do it. So the brand is fine. The brand is alive and well. As long as Hasbro can find new ways to market the brand of Dungeons and Dragons, there will always be somebody. You can say, well, Star Wars is dead. Yeah, well, the amount of Star Wars Halloween costumes I saw on Halloween would be paramount to telling me otherwise. The brand's alive and well, and will always be alive and well in some form. Hasbro will always be churning out new ways to market D&D, the brand. It's a pop culture brand. It's an art form. It has long outlived the game, and it will continue to long outlive the game. People recognize the word Dungeons and Dragons without ever having any contents to what it actually is. They only have a preconceived notion. So no, that aspect of Dungeons and Dragons is alive and well. Now, for what we consider Dungeons and Dragons, those of us who have the long history of rolling dice, roll D20, stuff happens, is alive. It exists in a multitude of forms. The name D&D doesn't really mean anything, right? We know that we are on the current 6th edition or 20th edition, depending upon which aspect of the history you follow, of the thing that's called Dungeons and Dragons. And in some vague chimera sense, it does still sort of look like what Gygax created, but it has stopped being Gygaxian Dungeons and Dragons ages ago. It is no longer Gygaxian Dungeons and Dragons. It will never be Gygaxian Dungeons and Dragons again. You just have to accept that it is what it is. If you choose not to play it, that's fine. There are, last count, 5,012 other games on the market across the planet that do their best to emulate the D20 level-based Gygaxian system. So you have a plethora, oh my God, I used plethora in a sentence, a plethora of games available to you if you want to continue D20 stuff happens Gygaxian level-based. I, of course, recommend Dungeon Crawl Classics from Goodman Games, Castles and Crusades from Troll Lord Games, and of course Shadowdark, because it holds a personal, it's Shadowdark, or my stuff. If you want to spend $5-6 on some D20 goofiness, pick up my stuff. It's D&D. It's D20 level based nonsense. So D&D role playing, a bunch of people sitting around rolling dice with character record sheets, isn't dead. It's alive and well, and will continue on in some form forever. There will always be somebody playing dice somewhere. Maybe not me, because I'll be dead soon. Maybe not the rest of us 75, 80-year-olds who were playing it in the 80s in our parents' basement. But yeah, it's not dead. It's fine. The rolling dice to have things happen. Level-based Gygaxian fantasy is fine. And there's an infinite number of permutations to that also. If medieval Hollywood fantasy isn't your thing, there's mudcore, dark grim fantasy, there's science fiction, there's science fantasy, there's my personal favorite, superheroes, there's Ironcaster's personal favorite, shout out to Ironcaster, big stompy mechs fighting giant rubber monsters, there's Old West, there's Weird West, you name it. I assure you, no matter how obscure it is, there is a role-playing game that has been made to do it. Let us not forget that there is a Dallas role-playing game. So somewhere in the past 50 years, everything has been made into a role-playing game. So no matter what your interest is, there will always be some way for you to sit down at a table, roll dice, and get fun. Have fun, right? So role-playing is not dead. So now we come to the digital evolution of Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons. This is what I think people are talking about when they say D&D is dead. D&D, as they understand it, has evolved and changed. And as we can see from these multiple comments, most people don't like the changes, which is fine, because whether we like it or not, us old fucks aren't the target audience anymore. I'm not the target audience anymore. Okay, so let's see what we say. D&D has died quite a bit recently. It's good to be a game with resurrection built into the spell list. D&D is scattered to the winds. 1,000 smaller games have sprung up. I just want them to follow through with putting AD&D 1E SRD out under Creative Commons license in early 2025, as they said they will. You will see. The game is dead. The brand means nothing. The brand means everything according to Hasbro. These are Hasbro words. They're not mine. We'll cycle back to that. So most of us believe that the Dungeons and Dragons we grew up with doesn't exist anymore. And it has died. It hasn't died. It's just changed. And it's going to continue to change because Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro is under the false presumption of what they think the hobby wants. And as long as Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro proceeds to continue to think what they think what the hobby wants, then it's going to continue to go the way that they have been planning it since 2020. Now, I will say in Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro's defense, they did clearly come out and inform us what their plans were in 2020. In fact, they were warning us as early as 2015 what their plans were. I mean, you could even go back to look at 4th edition and say, well, this is them telling us what their plans for Dungeons and Dragons was. But very clearly, as I have consistently said to you, nonstop, despite all the people who continue to say otherwise, Hasbro has made their plans perfectly clear for what they think D&D has to become for them to make money. And that is following this pay-to-play virtual VTT thing. Now, that's not our D&D. Most of us have no interest in that. A lot of people are betting on it to fail. And it probably will fail because it's being made from a false perception of what they think the industry wants. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around the question that the eventual digital evolution is going to happen in some form. Technology evolves, we evolve, our use of different mediums evolve. So, of course, more and more stuff will be online, more and more stuff will be AI, more and more stuff will be virtual. That's a given, whether we like it or not. Unless there's another drastic change in the technology paradigm, it's going to happen, right? But in regards to how Wizards of the Coast is handling it, they continue to fail forward. They continue to go about pursuing this very simple idea in the most self-destructive, back-ass way. It is almost as if Hasbro wants them to fail. It's almost as if somewhere on the Hasbro calendar, it clearly says 2027 Dungeons and Dragons 6X and 2030 Dungeons and Dragons VTT. Oh, wait, it does. So again, Hasbro's been very clear about their goals for Dungeons and Dragons. Hasbro's very clear that they want Wizards of the Coast to fail. They expect Wizards of the Coast to fail. Wizards of the Coast doesn't do anything that Hasbro needs anymore. In that sense, very much so, D&D is gone. It's dead. Our idea of what the Dungeons and Dragons ecology, economy, evolution stopped with Fourth. Stopped with the discovery that we could have AI computers do this much better or worse than humans. Stop with the understanding that eventually all technology is going to transform to a brand new medium. That medium may be unbelievably successful, artificial intelligence, or much like Betamax, VHS, DVD, and Laserdisc, it will inevitably fail. I suppose we're just waiting for AI porn because, whoever does porn first is usually who wins the technology evolution. Oh, wait, AI porn already exists. So it is counterintuitive to say my hobby is dead. I'm going to still be playing it until I shuffle off to the West. I assume each and every one of you are still going to be playing roll dice, stuff happens in some form. General population of the planet Earth refers to what we're calling role-playing D&D. Dungeons and Dragons is a catch-all, nebulous pop culture term that Hasbro can attach to anything, and the general populace can attach to anything. You could walk by and see some people playing Warhammer, and I will bet you $1 somebody will say, oh, are they playing Dungeons and Dragons? If you see people doing sword tag or Ren Fair or LARPing in the park, like I have sword tag here at my park, somebody always walks by and goes, oh, are they doing the Dungeons and Dragons thing? There are some people who play sword tag in my park every week. They dress up in the armor. They've got the weapons. But I was going to the doctor's office and the person was driving me looked and said, hey, is that Dungeons and Dragons thing, do you think? So it doesn't matter what Dungeons and Dragons is because the populace has this preconceived notion that they can apply to anything, which is what Hasbro has been very clearly open about wanting. This is what we want. We want to market the D&D brand because D&D, the game, doesn't make us any money. And if year after year, all these people keep saying, I'm not going to support Wizards of the Coast anymore. I'm not going to buy 5e. I'm not going to buy Dungeons and Dragons, and makes hundreds and hundreds of videos about how awful D&D is. Then, of course, Wizards of the Coast is assured that what they're thinking is right. People aren't buying D&D. People aren't playing D&D. D&D doesn't make them money. D&D, the brand, makes them money. Even the stupid movie ended up making them money thanks to Netflix. So they're like, it paid off. We'll just keep throwing ideas out there. Some of them will succeed. Some of them will fail. Maybe the meat sticks will be the biggest thing we ever did. Maybe we'll lose. It doesn't matter because it's out there. And we can keep monetizing that. We don't need Wizards of the Coast. We don't need these people. We certainly don't need these old people who keep complaining about us. So we can just do whatever we want with the name. But as long as there is some kid somewhere in a basement, an attic, a dinner table, a parking lot, a playground, or even in their brain going, ooh, it'd be cool. Let's play superheroes. Let's play goblins with sticks. Let's play zombies. Then D&D role-playing is alive. But making videos that praise D&D, praise role-playing, praise the hobby, doesn't get you algorithm clicks. Making videos where you just talk about the news like I do doesn't get you algorithm clips. In order to get that 5.5K subs, you either gotta simp to D&D like Genie D, or you gotta wave the I hate D&D and I'm gonna just talk shit about D&D. And that's what the algorithm sees. So every year, a bunch of people who repeatedly tell us they don't play Dungeons and Dragons, They don't support Dungeons and Dragons. They don't buy Dungeons and Dragons. They have no idea what's going on with 5e. For about 5 to 10 days every year around this time of year, they'll tell us how D&D is dead. They'll tell you their game is dead because somewhere along the line, they've forgotten it's not their game. It's everybody's games. It's all these people's games. And as long as all these people are still playing Goblin with sticks, shameless shout out, shameless self-promotion, then it's not dead. Sure, it's not what Gygax wrote, but so what? If you want to play what Gygax wrote, kindly head on over to Trollord Games and pick up Castles and Crusades. If you want to continue to play first edition, second edition, third edition, BX, BXW, BH, Holmes, Zero Box, White Box, all those variations, they're out there, guys. I assure you, there's like 5,012 OSR, OGL, retro clones. So your game isn't dead. The brand will continue long after you or I stop breathing. Because as long as Hasbro can continue to milk that D&D brand, they'll milk it. And if they ever find reach the point where it's like they don't think it's making any money anymore, then they'll gradually fade it away, like they did with Power Rangers and Transformers. And then they'll just see, and if interest realises, they'll do it again. The system, well, we have 6th edition. It is, according to Wizards of the Coast, selling like hotcakes. The Player's Handbook was the single fastest selling Dungeons and Dragons product of all time. They sold on opening day well over 3,000 copies within minutes. That was unheard of. Of course, what they neglected to tell you is they were counting the 3,000 copies they sold at Gen Con the month before, all the digital pre-orders, and the copies that they sent to all the game shops a week before it was on the shelves. And then, of course, all the copies that were sold on the shelves day one. So yes, wow, look, it was the fastest selling. They sold over 3,000 copies in under 10 seconds because they sold 3,000 copies a month before. So D&D 6th edition is doing quite well. I mean, look at the Dungeon Master's Guide. It somehow sold over 1,000 copies before it was on the market because they sold 1,000 copies last week at London Comic Book Con. But they can tell us, look how well it sold. So as far as Wizards of the Coast is concerned, 6th edition is doing gangbusters. And 6th edition will evolve into this digital, virtual format. But we're not going to stop making physical stuff. We're just going to cut down. We can expect about 4 physical things a year. And they'll probably be these super deluxe box sets where it's 90 to 160 bucks. But, you know, modules and all that other stuff will all be online. And that's a whole separate topic that we can talk about on Wednesdays, about the digitization and Hasbro's monopoly on anything that they want to make Dungeons and Dragons and how once you upload stuff and, well, you know what it is. But my friends, let me just tie this up because I think I've wasted way too much of your time. But I appreciate each and every one of you who's taken time out of your day to listen to me pontificate. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there about the fate of our hobby. And yes, it isn't what it was. It got, you know, it was a niche for a very, very long time. And then it got extremely popular, more popular than anybody imagined. And now it's drifting back to its niche phase. And obviously there's some negativity attached to that because there always is. And it'll eventually just revert back to the D&D we know and love from the 80s, a niche, geeky, fun thing for people to get together and play, whether it be person, online, digital, analog, virtual, artificial, satellite. I don't know if it's 2 pieces of cheese sitting at a table. As long as there's rolling dice and we're talking about goblins with sticks, it's just make-believe with rules. So it's never going to go away. But what do I know? We all know that I'm an idiot, right? I'm an inexperienced baby. You have your choices out there for how you want to play Goblin with Sticks. Obviously, I would prefer each and every one of you to use the links down below to buy my merch, including my brand new merch, the Seth's Gear and Ammo Christmas catalog, link down below. I will now open it to each and every one of you. Is there any other things you want to say about the death of Dungeons and Dragons? Do you think role-playing is dead? Do you think rolling dice and having fun with your friends is dead? Do you think the name D&D is going to go away anytime soon? Do you think Hasbro's going to wake up tomorrow and go, yep, we can't make any more money off of this, Bill, shut it down? June 2027. We are in the time of plenty. Choose wisely. Absolutely. Whatever you want to play, there is a game out there. I assure you, no matter how obscure, kinky, weird, I bet you there's a role-playing game that does it. I mean, Dallas, the role-playing game, one of the single greatest role-playing games of all time, exists. Zombie D&D wants your brains. Tasty brains. Ha-ha! In your face, Zombie D&D. I don't have brains. I traded them in for tuna. It died again. Yes, it's always dying. There's always some person who wants to tell you you're playing it wrong. D&D is dead. Stop playing D&D. I don't support D&D. I don't care about D&D, but I'm going to make a bunch of videos telling you how it's dead and how you're playing it wrong. That's all I have to say on the matter. Feel free to comment down below. If you want to, well, that is your prerogative, Michael. You can spend your money everywhere you want. I, of course, would prefer that you spend your money on my merch. Links down below. Till next time, have a great day. Stay safe out there, especially with tomorrow. No matter what happens, let's try and just be sane and not have any weirdness happens. I appreciate each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to listen to me be an idiot. If you appreciate this, let me know. If you never want to hear me talk about this topic ever again, let me know. Just go out and play Goblins with Sticks and have fun. I will talk to you later. Tell that you go screaming fight, type of light, at the light. Every night you don't fight, even sight, vivid sights, baby, shows, and escapade. Fancy arcade, pixelated porn.